Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
There's a priest who very much believes Francis is illegitimate and anti-pope, and that he was just excommunicated, quote unquote, for schism. Why? Because he won't recant that he believes Francis to be an anti-pope heretic. And he has said this publicly. And every time a priest says that, the clock starts ticking on what's going to happen to them. And it's so far always been the same. I fully expect Father Joachim Heimerl is going to have this happen to him because he keeps writing letters that Marco Tosati and others keep publishing, calling Francis an anti-pope heretic, basically. Francis could just ignore these priests saying these things. And the laymen who elevate their voices and support them. He could say, Rome could just laugh it off whenever they're asked by the press about these guys as fringe actors and leave it to their bishops to deal with. But they don't. Instead, they actively are suppressing them and crushing them, which gives them credibility. They do not understand what that is they're doing. And so their following grows. If you're worried about schism, this is where it happens. And it's not because the priest speaks up, but it's because how Rome reacts. We go to Info Vaticana for this unfortunate headline. Costa Rican priest excommunicated for denying Pope Francis's authority. There's the priest. Apologies for these pop-ups. Info Vaticana is terrible for pop-ups. And our totally fair and totally free hosts are actively destroying people who try to use any mechanism to stop that kind of thing, because it definitely impacts their site. This was published 2 days ago on the Spanish language website. We're using a translation extension here. Do not think for a second that any one of these priests who speaks up is not taking a bold stand, even if you fundamentally disagree with what they're saying, because they know what's going to happen. I'm now having to report on a case like this every single week here on this channel, because unfortunately, more and more of these priests are stepping forward and telling the truth and being punished for it. They have the courage of their convictions. Give them credit at least for that. And please pray for them that they will have their consciences and their minds illuminated so they see the truth fully, and then they act accordingly. Because it could very well be that they're right. What if they're right? I know that's a hard pill for some people to swallow. Let's go to the article. Quote, "There's not a week in which we unfortunately do not talk about the case of a priest who has decided to risk his vocation by speaking out. We continue to be immersed in a period of serious division in which more and more priests do not feel represented by Pope Francis, who must bear some responsibility if so many priests speak out in this regard. In this case, José Rafael Quiros, Archbishop of San Jose in Costa Rica, has announced that the priest Pablo de Jesus Tamayo Rodriguez has been excommunicated late sententia, quote, for having committed the crime of schism. The Archbishop explains that a canonical process was carried out that began in the diocese and ended in the dicastery for the doctrine of faith, and that resulted in the excommunication of the 81-year-old Costa Rican priest." Let's hold here. They didn't have to do this. He's 81 years old. That means he's retired and has been for probably 10, 11 years. It means that he's been collecting essentially his priestly pension, the equivalent of, possibly living in a home or something. But he's been speaking out, and now they've taken all of that from him. They didn't have to do this. They could have found another way to get him to stop talking like this. But instead, they excommunicated him, which means he's lost all of his support from the diocese. In the statement, José Rafael Quiros explained that the crime of schism consists of the, quote, refusal to recognize and submit to the authority of the Supreme Pontiff, and thus to communion with the members of the church subject to him. Disregarding the fact that the entire argument here is based on the fact that people are arguing that Francis is not the Supreme Pontiff and thus not owed submission to him. This is why so many of us are irritated with the cardinals like Burke and others who just basically tell you to hold and wait. Hold and wait. We don't know how long that's going to have to be and if the next pope is going to be like him or worse. It's why we need them to speak up, to accept the responsibility that comes with their office and to speak up, but they won't. According to the prelate, the priest incurred the situation despite warning given, and once the administrative penal process was carried out, in which he had the opportunity to retract his schismatic position, and of his own free will, he persistently maintains his position. It is for this reason that, much to my regret, with the authority that has been entrusted to me to ensure the salvation of souls, once due process has been completed, and the penalty of excommunication has been declared for the crime of schism, which has already been proven, the holy people of God are informed of the canonical situation of Father Tomeo Rodriguez, the Archbishop added. The Costa Rican prelate stressed that the excommunicated priest is prohibited from any ministerial participation in the celebration of the Holy Mass, and that he does not have license to validly administer sacraments such as confession or celebration of marriage or a baptism. In addition, the bishop warns the faithful who have participated in the celebrations presided over by the excommunicated priest that if they continue to adhere to him, they may also incur the penalty of being excommunicated immediately without the need for ecclesial intervention. Finally, the Archbishop concludes by asking the faithful to pray for the perseverance and fidelity of all priests and lay people to the truth of the gospel that the Church seeks to teach and transmit to the world. End quote. Has he seen what the things coming out of Francis's mouth, especially since the synod started, about this new synodal church, and how we need a new theology for this new synodal church? Has he been paying attention? Because they're not the same thing as the gospel preached by the truth, or the gospel of the truth preached by the Catholic Church. They're not the same thing. And this is why we need the good bishops and the good cardinals to actually take the questions people have about this with the gravity that is demanded. Because whatever else you may think of the Bene Plenists, the Benedict was the real pope, and Francis is an anti-pope of some kind or another. There's only a dozen, at least, different arguments, different kinds of arguments made to that end. Whatever else you may think of them, they are growing in numbers. And telling people to stay in the church is not going to be good enough for that. Because that's the problem here, is we are now dealing with this monstrosity of evil coming out of Rome with official sanction of those who appear to hold offices in the church. This is a much more serious situation. And I already know that in 2025, I'm going to be reporting to you over and over again all of these different stories of new priests and maybe some bishops stepping forward and saying they don't believe Francis is the Pope. And they will continue to get crushed and excommunicated. While these bishops, these cardinals whose job it is to actually examine these questions, won't do anything. The question I have for you, do you believe that if Cardinal Burke were to convene an imperfect council with and had Cardinal Mueller's support and had whatever other cardinals you want to name, including maybe even some hostile to the question but who agreed to participate, what do you think would happen to them? What would Rome's response be? This is a fantastical thought experiment, by the way, simply because it's a fantasy. It's the chances of them calling an imperfect council, a la Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, doctor of the church, as well as what other theologians who, some of them doctors of the church, some of them just theologians, some of them not even canonized, but you don't have to canonize every great mind of the church. Cajetan comes to mind, Torquemada, not the Inquisitor Torquemada, but another Torquemada, as well as several others. They all basically said the same thing. The heretic can't be pope. And then they had different mechanisms for that. There were so many of the saints who said this stuff, and they consistently are invoked on this question, but it's ultimately the magisterium that has to make these decisions. And would be really nice if those with magisterial authority would do so. Hence the concept of an imperfect council. What do you think would happen if they convened such a council? Imagine Cardinal Burke getting up on YouTube with a published letter on his website, and a published letter that was also signed by Cardinal Sarah and a whole bunch of other people, and it went nuclear online. Any news Catholic website, including some secular websites, published this thing, announcing an imperfect council. List of the cardinals' names, including some who are clearly hostile to the whole proposition, but you want to have them involved too for validity's sake. What would be the result of that? You let me know in the comments. I already told you what I think would happen. At the very least, there'd be a schism, probably. Most of those cardinals probably get excommunicated, except for the ones who bent the knee to Bergoglio. So I'm curious what you think about this. As always, pray for the church and for everybody we spoke about. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.